Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. We're going to cover everything. We're going to cut through all the propaganda, give it to you straight from left, right, and center. The opinions are what counts. Hello everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report on Patriot TV. Happy to have you with us as we close out the week. Listen, we've talked a lot of politics in our last show. We talked about the State of the Union, but let me get down to some raw economic news that came out on Friday. And folks, it was not the best news the administration was hoping for. Producer price index, we talk about that a lot, up 0.5%. And what that means on an annual basis, 2.8%. That's well ahead of the Fed's goal of 2%. And here's another alarming statistic for you. When you strip out the volatile food and energy, it was up 0.8%, which is 3.6% on an annual basis. These are not good numbers. Wall Street was not happy about it. The S&P 500 and the Dow Jones Industrial Average were down about 1%, maybe a little higher by the end of the close. So, yeah, stocks fell hard, particularly financial stocks. Goldman Sachs, American Express. There was a concern, American Express, that white-collar people are going to be laid off due to AI. Big fear out there in the market about that, and that they wouldn't be spending. And so they took down Goldman Sachs and American Express, two of the leading financial stocks in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And there is a large AI fear out there. You know, we talked about a little bit in the pre-show. Anthropic, you know, as far as the Defense Department goes, they basically wanted to have a human being as the final person to make a call on missile. The Pentagon said, no, that's not what we're looking for. So there's a fight going on there. OpenAI, another Sam Altman's company, you know, raising $110 billion at a valuation of $750 billion. Think about that, folks. They raised $110 billion. Anyone that thinks this AI trade is going away is living on another planet. I mean, NVDA came out, the chip play for artificial intelligence. Record earnings, revenue up 73%. And then what happens to the stock? Down 10 points on Thursday and down another 3 or 4 on Friday. There's concern that there may not be as many chip purchases in the future. But why am I going through all these economic numbers? Because, folks, it has a major effect on what's going to happen politically. You know, Trump has a new Fed chair that's going to go through Senate confirmation, Kevin Warsh. Well, when you see PPI at 0.5 and then strip out food and energy 0.8, annual inflation rate 3.6 and 2.8 respectively, that is a tough nut to swallow to get interest rates down. And why is that important? Because obviously we've got a housing issue in the country. Why Trump was meeting with Mondami the day after the State of the Union, I don't get that. I mean, I really don't. But 10-year, which is 10-year note, hovering right around 4%, just slightly above it, and mortgage rates dipping below 6%. You can get a 15-year fixed rate loan right now under 5.5%. 30-year notes still hovering right around 6. So again, 10-year notes come down, but mortgage rates have come down a little bit slower. Why is this important? Because obviously you hear it all the time about, you know, the affordability crisis, the average person being 40 years old to buy their first house. That's an issue. It's certainly different than it has in the past. And why is this important? Because the president, again, following his State of the Union, folks, he was getting 65% approval on what he said during the State of the Union. Here's the issue he's got, okay? Fallout from some of these economic numbers. Look, Republicans overwhelmingly support him. Democrats overwhelmingly despise him. They despise him. Independents have shifted where he's underwater on independents. Now, a lot of this goes to the younger voters, 18 to 30. 18 to 30-year-olds, for the most part, are not buying houses. They don't have any money saved up. They got student loan debt. Whereas a lot of the equity and wealth in the country is concentrated on older Americans. And this wealth gap, if you will, is contributing significant politically. When you look at some of these things happening, particularly on the Democratic side of the ledger, you're shaking your head and going, who the hell would ever vote for somebody like that? Well, I'll tell you who would. Younger people and people who are living on the edge that are going paycheck to paycheck. Why is this important? Because you look at some of, as Trump said during his State of the Union, when these Democrats just sat on their hands, he says, these people are crazy. Well, they may be crazy, but some of their supporters are crazier than they are. And why is this all important? Because one of the things the president has made a cornerstone of his economic policy, obviously, is the tariffs and bringing down interest rates. Now, do I think the PPI, and when you strip out food and energy, you get to stay at these levels? No, I think it's going to come down. But boy, you don't want to take the risk that it stays elevated levels. That would make it challenging for the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. And if anything pops up that prevents that, that's going to cause lower stock prices, slower housing. That's a problem. So good news is, like we talked before, the economy is looking like it can grow 3 to 4% in 2026. That's really good growth. Inflation, still too high. Unemployment, low, 4.3. So, the tariff piece here, it's a variable, but with 10% tariffs across the board coming on from the Trump administration, that has somewhat calmed markets. It's not 15, as Trump said he might go to. And you look at some of the fallout of this. Washington Post, for example, owned by Jeff Bezos. They lost $125 million in 2025. They are going to make some staff cuts at the Washington Post. You just saw a deal where Paramount now controlling Warner Brothers. Netflix backed out of the deal. Don't feel sorry for Netflix. They got paid $2 billion breakup fee, like Netflix needed that. So now the owners of CBS and CNN, all the liberals, are freaking out because there will be consolidation. CBS has somewhat shifted towards a more moderate stance in its political tone over the past month. And, the Tiffany Network, that's got liberals and people on the left side of the ledger freaking out. Though in the fact now that CNN is going to be part of that same group owned by Larry Ellison's son. And all of a sudden, the media network, from a liberal conservative point of view, is finally starting to get a little bit, quote, centered. We'll see. We'll see how that plays itself out. But my point in bringing all this up, Donald Trump ran on an economic message. The economic results right now are mixed. Again, we talked previously about a K-shaped economy. If you're in that upper part of the K, you're doing just fine. Notwithstanding, you're having some losses in the market on Friday. But if you're in that bottom part, you're struggling to get by. And we talked about younger people. That credit card debt is at a record high right now. So when you add in credit card debt, student debt, it's a factor. So again, there's time that this can work through. But again, moving the economy is like moving an aircraft carrier. It's big and it doesn't turn easily. But with the rapid advancements happening in artificial intelligence and the belief in the marketplace that is going to have a major effect on companies, well, it is, and their hiring practices. Block, a Fortune 500 company, just announced they're laying off 20% of their workforce. Why? They can use artificial intelligence to replace them. You see stories all the time about robotics. Yeah, it's real. It's real, folks. You see the robotic taxis, mainly in big cities, New York, Los Angeles, Dallas, etc. But some of that stuff is starting to work too. Autonomous vehicles. And when you can combine robots, artificial intelligence, there is a concern about the labor force. So keep that in mind, the economics, because most elections come down to people asking, am I better off now? Normally, a presidential election than I were 4 years ago, go Ronald Reagan saying, are you better off now than you were to my predecessor? Right now, again, Trump made that economic argument in 2024. Some of it has come to fruition. We did have growth in his first year, solid growth. But again, we're still spending at record levels. The budget deficit has not come down. Interest rates hovering about where they were, come down a little bit. But not to the level that Trump wants to see them. Trump wants to see dramatically lower interest rates. Why? What happens? Well, if mortgage rates come down, that can be a jump start for the housing economy. Remember when we had COVID and interest rates ticked all the way down to 2 or 3% range? Real estate prices really shot up in value. That's what the president's hoping for. We'll see if he gets that. But again, not long ago, the Dow Jones crossed 50,000. Now it's trading 48.8, 48.7. Corrected a little bit. That's to be expected. But we have to see that, quote, K-shaped economy. It's got to spread out to make sure more and more Americans are getting the benefit of that. If that happens, then the midterms may not be as bad for Republicans. Bear in mind, Democrats, as we've said before, they'll walk over broken glass to vote against Trump and whoever the Republican nominee is. So let's get into some of the politics of this. We digested the State of the Union speech when we did our show on Wednesday. Okay. There's still reverberations coming out of it. I mean, John Fetterman, he is a voice of reason in a crazy atmosphere, said Democrats yelling and screaming is disappointing. I know every one of you saw Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib yelling and screaming, and Democrats sitting on their ass, and Green getting thrown out, and 70 Democrats at some crazy ass thing, not even in the Capitol. But despite the reasonably good economic numbers, despite the fact we've sealed the border, illegal immigration way, way down, almost to a halt. Methodology on ICE on deportations not necessarily being embraced by the voting public. So right now, polling is still showing Democrats with an opportunity to take the House in the midterms. Right now, it's likely that they will. You do not want this. Oh, no. Even if it's by a slim majority, you're going to see investigations. If it's by a wider majority, you're going to see impeachments because of Trump derangement syndrome. So we don't want that to happen. So there's still time for the administration to continue focus on the economy, growing the jobs market, which has been somewhat stagnant. Again, when you have 2 million people leave voluntarily and another 650, 700,000 deported and more happening on a daily basis, by definition, your labor force, if you deport all the illegal aliens or they self-deport and they have jobs, those jobs got to be made up by Americans. And that's happening, but the net numbers aren't changing that much. So again, you have good economic growth position. We're positioned to lower interest rates. So when we get a Fed approval, Kevin Warsh, but boy, with these numbers today, it makes it tougher. All right, speaking of politics, okay. The administration's been having conversations with the Iranians, and those talks do not appear to be going great. Now, this is a serious issue because Trump has made it abundantly clear that if the talks do not work, he has the option to use military. It's not his first choice, but maybe his last choice. And the Iranians, they are a formidable force. Non-essential personnel were ordered out of Jerusalem, or given an opportunity to leave. That doesn't happen if some type of action is likely not going to happen. So keep your eye. Stealth jets have been sent to Israel. Massive buildup outside of the Strait of Hormuz. Oil prices still relatively high. Now, gas prices haven't moved too much, around $3, but oil prices are up there. If a war breaks out, the last thing, it's an economic balance. Oil prices go up, that's going to filter through the rest of the economy. So they got to factor that in. Okay, we're going to take a break right now for 30 seconds, but when we come back, we're going to get into some of the other political issues. A lot of topics to head into the weekend here, folks. We're on top of it for you. Be back in 30.
Sadie, why don't more people know about the health benefits of Glucodown soluble fiber? That it lowers blood sugar, especially after meals?
Glucodown drink mixes are enriched with soluble fiber for healthy blood sugar. It's diabetic-friendly nutrition, and it's clinically proven.
Glucodown's clinically proven soluble fiber helps maintain blood sugar in a healthy range, especially after meals.
Glucodown is a game changer.
Keep your blood sugar healthy. Try all 8 flavors of Glucodown.
Available at Amazon or in the diabetic care aisle at your local pharmacy.
And we're back, folks. All right, we dived a little bit into that Texas Senate race at our last show, but let me do a little bit deeper dive today because a lot of people are saying, oh, come on, Mark, Texas is red. We're going to win it regardless of who's out there. Don't bet your bottom dollar on that. On the Democratic side of the equation, Jasmine Crockett is actually leading Tallarico, the young representative in the state of Texas. Fairly healthy margin, 56-44. Now, that's in a Texas poll. Polling's not widespread, but she is in the lead. And people say, well, everything I see, Mark, if she's the nominee of the Democrats, we're sure to win. Not so fast. On the Republican side, it's really a knife fight. John Cornyn, the sitting four-time incumbent, is sitting at 34%. John Paxton is at 36%. Hunt is at 26% and rising. Wesley Hunt. You've got a very tight race among Republicans. Now, the way it works is the top 2 vote finishers are going to have to go through an expensive runoff on the Republican side. Could cost $50 to $100 million in spending. That money could be used elsewhere across the country. Republican Party is not happy about this. I'm not happy about it either. Now, I know a lot of the MAGA Republicans want to see Paxton defeat Cornyn. Be careful what you ask for. John Cornyn's won every election in the state of Texas. He's voted with Trump in excess of 90% of the time. Remember the old Ronald Reagan analogy? If I get 80% of the vote, I'm happy. I'm not going to win every time, but if I get 4 out of 5, that's pretty good. That race has Republicans very worried because think about this. Whether it's Crockett or Tallarico that wins, they will be a formidable opponent. Yeah, Crockett's got some baggage, okay, but not the baggage that some of the previous nominees have had. Everybody remember Beto O'Rourke? Oh, jeez. Now, don't get me wrong. Whichever Republican comes out of this will be favored. And early voting has started. I think the general election ends on March 3rd. So early voting is going on. So, folks, the last thing the Republican Party needs is to be throwing $50 to $100 million at this race, but that's what looks like it's going to happen. So we will keep an eye on that as results come out first week in March. But right now, this is a risk that we unfortunately are going to have to go through. A lot of people in the Republican Party support Paxton. A lot of the establishment Republicans support Cornyn. And a lot of people support Hunt. I mean, you don't get a race that tight. And each of these candidates has good qualities. Some of them have some baggage that, frankly, I think would be prohibitive, maybe even very prohibitive at winning, but we'll cross that bridge once we see who the top 2 finishers are. All right, moving on. You know, Omar caught an earful at the State of the Union talking about the fraud happening in Minnesota. The administration is actually revoking, or not revoking, holding up $259 million in funding until this fraud investigation ramps up. I mean, we heard stories about one Social Security number used 120 times. I mean, feds have got to get their arm around this fraud. We don't know how Ilhan Omar went from, a modest net worth to being worth over $30 million in a relatively short period of time. And we're not going to accuse her of anything because we don't have the facts. But the facts are she became a fairly wealthy woman, and she represented a district where there's a lot of fraud. We're not tying them in together, so we can't do that yet. We don't have the evidence, but the FBI and the feds are investigating this, and they do need to get to the bottom of what's going on in Minnesota. And if it's bad there, it's bad elsewhere. We've heard horrific cases coming out of Los Angeles. Again, folks, it's always blue states, blue cities. It's not exclusive, but it's crystal clear the Biden administration deliberately let this stuff lax. And the Trump administration's cracking down on it. Well, they need to. We need to get some answers here. Now, another little morsel to chew on here. The state of Kansas has revoked transgender IDs. Why have they done that? Because they're going back to whatever your gender was at birth. You know what? They're right about that. Now, will other states follow? I don't know. We'll see. Certainly no blue states will, but there could be other red states that follow. All they're saying is you can have a driver's license, but your gender has to be what you were born with. Kansas is not accepting this gender change stuff that's been going on. Just a little, morsel out there. Now, we also talked about, the election. And here's the interesting thing, folks. National security, Republicans leading 48-40. Donald Trump's approval. This is Rasmussen. As of the airing of this show, 45 approve, 53 don't. That number's got to get closer to 47, 48, 49%. If he's 48 or higher, Republicans will do okay in the midterms. If he's sub 47, it's going to be tough. If he's below 47, they're going to lose the House. Now, again, this is just one poll. It's highly respected, though, just like Insider Advantage. Now, while all this is going on, we still, believe it or not, folks, Department of Homeland Security still has not been funded. Democrats are blocking it because they continue to want ICE reforms. What that means? TSA. You go through lines in airport security, it's going to be tougher because they're going to miss a paycheck. Coast Guard. Similar situation. Look what happened in the Northeast. 2 feet of snow. Did we have money to fund it through FEMA? No. The Democrats are using the Department of Homeland Security as a weapon to try, right now, somewhat successfully, to get some ICE reforms. Now, could the administration force a vote on this? They could. But bear in mind, you've got the SAVE Act out there, passed by the House. It's in the Senate now. John Thune is reluctant to use the standing filibuster to pass the SAVE Act because he's not sure he has all his members on board. You pretty much need that to be the case because there would be crazy amendments put forth. And it would take up Senate time, probably 3 to 4 weeks of Senate time. They really want to do that if the DHS hasn't been funded? I don't know. It doesn't sound like John Thune wants to do that. So if Thune elects not to use the talking filibuster, which we've talked about a little bit here, then that SAVE Act is going to be deferred. Now, could he bring it up later in the year? Yes. But my gut feeling tells me he's not going to go through the talking filibuster while DHS has not been funded. Because then that would lead to a 3 or 4 week further delay. We'll see if some type of an agreement can be reached. But right now, folks, again, It doesn't seem like it, but we are operating under a partial, albeit limited, government shutdown. You know, the administration, Marco Rubio sort of has the lead on this, is investigating what happened in the case of those 4 people that died off the coast of Cuba. You know, when their speedboat was fired upon, they had a cache of weapons. At least 1 American's been identified, killed so far, 3 others to be identified, 6 or 7 people wounded. What are these guys thinking? I don't know. We're still waiting some facts on that. And the fallout from, you know, El Mencho, the guy in Mexico that headed the cartel, one of the cartels in Mexico, Jalisco New Generation, you know, he was killed this past week. There's fighting going on, roadblocks, all kind of things in Mexico to take over. Look, the State Department had an issue, a warning to Americans, do not go to Mexico. That's pretty serious. Now, things calm down now, maybe a little bit, but boy, you better be careful if you're going to Mexico, because violence in that country and the cartels and the reign of terror they've employed upon their citizens, it's real. And just the fact they decapitated 1 leader, that doesn't mean they decapitated the whole organization. So obviously, the fentanyl's into this country's way down. That is a priority of the Trump administration, and they've done a damn good job of making it happen. So we want to congratulate them on that, but keep your guard up. If you're going to Mexico, a narco-terrorist state, be cautious. Now, you know, the Mexican army performed brilliantly in taking this guy down. But that, you know, again, there will be leadership that will pop up from the ranks. And businesses this profitable, they're not going to go away overnight. Keep that in the back of your mind. Now, a final thing, you know, I deliberately saved this for the end of the show here. The amount of publicity that this Epstein case continues to get is off the charts. I mean, folks, this is ancient news. Why is it still, are we talking about it years after his death? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the Democrats are continuing to push it, and more revelations come out all the time. And if someone's name is even associated with this document, they're being publicly shamed, humiliated, guilty or not guilty. High-profile people are losing positions. We had multiple people happen this week. Larry Summers retires at Harvard. Guy that ran the show over in when they all go to Germany for high-profile billionaires club. Every year they have their meetings. Well, the guy that interviewed Trump previously, he got asked to leave. So high-profile people are being taken down. You had another member of the British government taken down. And why is all this happening now? It's because all these files are out. People's names are associated with it. Guilty or not guilty, doesn't seem to matter. Your name is in that document. Politically, you're being expunged. So we had Hillary Clinton, did her testimony, seemed to skate right through it. Bill Clinton doing his testimony. We'll see what comes out of that. But the point being is, even at the State of the Union, again, it's front and center. And it's being kept front and center by both political parties. They want to sort of take this sponge and wring it out. And wherever the chips fall, the chips fall. So as the former President Clinton testifying now, we don't have results of that yet because he's in private testimony right now. One thing that was dumber than a rock, though, that came out of that is when our Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, who I think is normally fairly rational, smuggling a picture out of their house, that was dumber than a rock. That should not have happened. It was a violation of the rules. What the hell is she thinking? Folks, we call it straight on this show. I mean, when our side does something dumb, we call it out, and that was dumb. So, Epstein in full focus. A lot of economic numbers to keep an eye on. Iran front and center. Nothing happening with Russia, Ukraine. But folks, we're on top of it as always, and we're going to cut through it. So Have a great weekend coming up. We'll be back next week. Stay focused on the issues and cut through the media BS. Like Patriot TV and Schaftlein Report, you'll always get it straight. Thanks for viewing. See you next week.
AI is everywhere, but none of it does everything. Until now, meet Real Intelligence, RI, the one AI that does it all better. It generates cinema-quality 4K videos, unreal images, and award-worthy music, all in one platform. RI even writes code and handles advanced research at your command. No more juggling multiple apps or settling for less. Your creativity deserves one powerhouse. Real Intelligence, better at everything, all in one place. Try RI now for free at tryrinow.com.